Welcome to the Point Cybersecurity Podcast. Each week, join Vince Spina and Rachael Lyon to explore the latest in global cybersecurity news, trending topics, and cyber industry initiatives impacting businesses, governments, and our way of life. Now, let's get to the point. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point Podcast. I'm Rachael Lyon here with my co-host, Vince Spina. Vince, what's going on?
How are you doing today?
Good.
I just want to tell listeners, I love Rachel's radio voice. It comes down to kind of Luther Vandross level. I like
nice. That. Okay. I missed my calling. Maybe that midnight jazz.
Exactly.
Gig is calling. I got to tell you, Vince, we get the best guests on this podcast. At the right time. At the right time, too. Yeah. At the right time. And I couldn't think of a better time for today's guest to have our conversation. Please welcome to the podcast, David DiMolfetta. He is a cybersecurity reporter at Nextgov FCW and previously was a researcher for the Tech 202 at Washington Post, which if anyone's read that, it is amazing information. David, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here. Thank you both so much.
Welcome, David.
Okay, Vince, what you got for us to kick off today?
So thank you. Yeah, Rachel always lets me kind of jump in with the first question, David. So, hey, in briefing for this, we're excited that you're here. As Rachel pointed out, it's timely with, some of the activities that happened this week and some of the things that are going on in the industry. And in research, been reading on this thing called the National Cybersecurity Memo on AI guidelines. And I can tell you, we probably have not, I can't think of the last podcast that we didn't touch on the subject of AI. So First of all, for our listeners, could you give us a brief overview on what this National Cybersecurity Memo on AI guidelines is? And then maybe just kind of touch on what are some of the primary objectives that it's looking to solve?
You got it, yeah. In essence, the White House wants the military and intelligence community to mesh in more AI capabilities in its day-to-day operations. So the national defense apparatus, they've looked at how AI has really promulgated across the consumer markets over the past 2 years or so. And they said, wow, this is a big deal. This is very innovative. This could maybe tip the scales of national security. And they believe it's time to mesh these capabilities more into the missions, as the Govies say, the missions of the day-to-day agency operations. They want to infuse the national defense apparatus with AI. That's taken a lot of forms, of course. AI is already being used in warfare in many ways, for better or for worse. It helps with strategic planning. It can help with targeting. It could help with data analysis. So it's already being used quite a bit in the intelligence community, but the goal is to really, I think, get ahead of foreign adversaries, namely Russia and China, which we know are, at least what officials say, is they've been using their own AI capabilities in-house. Right. And it's Jake Sullivan said that this is a risk to the U.S. If we don't take this on. He said adversaries are in a quote, persistent quest to leapfrog our military and intelligence capabilities. And he also mentioned that adversaries are unlikely to be bound by the same principles that we would use AI in. So there's a risk here that intelligence officials have laid out, and they think it's necessary at this point to fully augment the military and intelligence workforce with AI.
Yeah, David, Rachel, if you don't mind, I actually want to just kind of pull that thread a little bit. So what I gleaned from that, David, is we're not all following the same rules when it comes to AI. So how do you see this memo impacting the development and the deployment of AI technologies from our perspective, our being the U.S.? Like how, are we bound and are we following, certain, rules based on this memo?
It's tricky because you have to remember that you're telling the defense industrial base to integrate AI for quite literally life and death decision making. I think we forget sometimes, and I think the media does this as well. These are capabilities that can kill people, and it's warfare, and that's why we have this stuff. And we're going to have to think, I think, very carefully about how this stuff is integrated. And of course, officials have considered this. One part of this memorandum, it's very direct in saying you cannot integrate AI capabilities into nuclear weapon capabilities. So there are considerations for this. And of course, there's a privacy and civil liberties aspect of this as well. The AI, generative AI, it's helped quite a bit with day-to-day data processing. And we already do quite a bit of that on the intelligence side. We know that for certain at this point in time. There are civil liberties matters to consider with this as well. I'd imagine that stakeholders are going to take this one slowly and carefully. On the contracting side, I'd also imagine that the private sector is quite excited to get more business in with the U.S. government. It's already been a mainstay. The contractor environment here in Washington exploded, of course, after 9/11. The whole notion was that how do we stop all this stovepiping with intelligence sharing? So contractors got a taste of this 25 years ago. They're going to see more of that, I think, in the years to come.
Yeah, it's, when it comes to AI, it's so, is amorphous the right word? I don't know. But it's like, how do you wrap your arms around it? How do you know the best implementation, right? I mean, how do you even know, how will these agencies even know where to get started? Are they, kind of starting with obvious use cases, or, do the guidelines specify all the different use? I'm just kind of curious, because you could put it in so many things and apply it in so many ways. It seems like it'd be hard to kind of plan a rollout, right, without some guardrails. In addition to what you've already mentioned.
Look, the big point is that there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done, and I think it's a bit too soon to tell the specifics. And you have to remember, a lot of this is veiled by top secret classified missions.
Right.
But look, the intelligence community and the DoD more broadly, they're already using AI.
Right.
A lot of the private sector has crafted and built certain specialized versions of AI tools to be used in these more air gap spaces. So
Gotcha.
A little while back, I had chatted with someone over at Google, and they've launched an air gapped version, so to speak, of their Gemini generative AI tool. So it's on-prem, but it doesn't necessarily connect to the internet in the same way that folks like you or me would use it. Right. They're already in there. These AI capabilities are already in there. They're already thinking about it. The main push here is that the entire apparatus has to take this on. That's going to take many forms.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I just keep going along those lines. So I was going to ask that kind of line of question. Was there, there's general purpose large language models that are out there, and they're all being, created by the various hyperscalers. You kind of touched on the fact that they are building more kind of secret, cleared type versions of that. Talked in terms of it just being, quite frankly, still Gemini or Copilot, or pick your hyperscaler large language version. But just wondering, is it different technology, or is it the safety net is the air gap component of it? I mean, are they using still kind of, Google Gemini the way I would use it in the private sector? Or, I mean, I don't know if we can even touch on this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
It's super intriguing. Like, how secret clear is it? When it moves to that side.
That seems like it'd be difficult, right?
Yeah. And then, maybe some of the 3-letter agencies, are they building their own kind of models and, all that? The big answer is probably yes.
So many questions. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm afraid I don't want to. I just want to come to the line, and then pull back. But it's super intriguing. Like, this is a Thomas Clancy kind of moment.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. No. When I asked this public sector executive at Google about it at the time, in essence, yes, it behaves the same way in terms of UI, in terms of user interface. The big difference is that data science,
what it's fed, what it's
right. Data scientists in that particular intelligence community environment are given more control over the developer tools that underpin that stuff. So, like, I don't handle the developer tools and the model settings and more technical under the hood aspects of how Gemini behaves. If I interface with Gemini, I simply type in, I don't know, come up with a good recipe for tonight, and I don't tinker with the foundation model that drives and underpins the stuff.
Yeah.
But with the more air-gapped version, you're going to have expert data scientists and professionals within that IC environment that are able to tinker more with the model settings and allow it to behave the way they need in order to carry out the mission at hand. Yeah, that's essentially how it works.
But all that information in the large language model, right? I mean, if it's going to be useful, I can only imagine what it's being fed and how it's being updated is very, very fascinating.
It is fascinating. I think the broad thing to keep in mind is circling back to this whole AI National Security Memorandum. There are privacy and civil liberty and ethics considerations to factor in. And I think if you ask civil liberties folks, I talk to them sometimes when I cover issues with foreign intelligence surveillance authorities, but they would probably say you can't have the intelligence community grade their own homework. And that's I think that's the major focus we're gonna have to keep in mind as the tasks in this memorandum get rolled out.
Yeah, David, let's keep going with that, because boy, like I said, I can't think of a podcast in the near past that we didn't talk about AI. And then one of the things that we start to get into are the ethical and legal considerations on that. Mm-hmm. And I loved your statement there. Is there anything, are there mechanisms in place to monitor and mitigate things like, bias and discrimination and privacy invasions or any of that? Anything that, has been written into that to make sure, like you said, our civil liberties are protected and all that goes with that?
It's a prevailing concern. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, that's the U.S. agency that oversees America's intelligence activities and programs, ODNI. They put out some guidance recently for the intelligence community to think about this. It's something that we've covered a little bit. But look, I might be going back to this a couple of times here. It's hard to measure this stuff explicitly because folks like us on the outside, we don't have the clearances and other capabilities to see what they're up to. We're not inside this,
right?
Yeah.
And it's the hand wavy joke saying, "Well, that's classified," but it is. It really is, and the intelligence community, I'm sure, thinks about it. Whether that's enough, thinking about it, making those considerations, it's hard to tell. I think more broadly, when we look at how AI is adopted across the federal government, we know there was a sweeping AI executive order put out, I think, around a year ago by President Biden. That, of course, has a slew of AI ethics considerations in there. But it's tough. It's tough to manage this stuff because these products, the consumer-facing aspects of these products are so exciting that there's a lot of pressure from the private sector, from these hyperscalers, as you mentioned, Vince, to roll these things out fast. And I feel like every few months, you're always seeing a new version of ChatGPT rolling in. So it's that classic historical pattern of technology always moving at a faster pace than the federal government.
Yeah.
And the thing, too, this is very timely, President-elect Donald Trump, he's back. And he's made it clear that his administration wants to repeal this stuff because they have issues with, I guess, how they consider it to be a quote unquote, woke AI agenda. And if you're repealing this stuff, then perhaps we may see slowdowns in how the government tries to regulate or implicate AI ethics. It's there's a lot more to come, I think, in this area. But look, as of now, the government has been thinking long and hard about this, and more than ever before. There have always been, way before large language models came on the scene, there's always been issues with ethical AI. But now it's a lot more consumer facing. We always talk about hallucinations, but for years we've had discriminatory credit lending algorithms. Why are people of color getting smaller credit lines? Because they're trained on discriminatory data. We've worked to rectify that, but the notion of that being an AI ethics concept, it's been there for a while, but now it's a lot more front facing because everybody is using AI in some way. Not everybody handles a credit lending algorithm, but everyone can handle, write me a funny story or write me a recipe.
Right.
Give me ideas for date night. I don't know. There's always something there. Look, help me research for this paper. It's a lot more commonplace uses with generative AI now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems too, and on the regulation front and the discourse there, right? And I think as with technology over the last several decades, right? If you put in too stringent regulations, then you're going to inhibit innovation, and all these things aren't going to happen. And I don't know if that's kind of, somewhat a reaction to, as we saw with social media, right? And all the things that happen, when those things just kind of went out, and then you see all the cascading impact of that, right, on mental health or other things. But it seems like it would be really hard, right, on getting the regulations right. Because it's going to be changing so much as well with AI. We just don't even know what the next year is going to hold. So how do you have like a future-proof regulation? It seems like it would have to be an ongoing, living, breathing thing. Is that kind of how people are looking at it in the government, David? Or kind of what are you hearing there? Yeah.
That's the goal, is to future-proof this stuff. But I think a lot with cyber regulations too. The issue is that a lot of this stuff is a journey. Right. When people talk about shoring up network defenses for cyber, that only works as well as what the current threat environment is, and people adapt. Things change. Technology adapts. There are legal mechanisms in place. There are language mechanisms in place in bills to say we have to review this every 2 years, or we have to put a new report in every 2 years, or the secretary has to look at this within 16 months, every 16 months. That dynamic is there. It's not being ignored. This is a big country. There's a lot of stuff to get done. There's a lot of stuff to govern, and many things outside of, I know this is a cyber podcast, but there are many other important concerns outside of cyber too. It's not easy to manage all of this. So yes, Rachel, the short answer is yes, but good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
David, you make a great point. I mean, this is a big country, and there's a lot to govern and regulate and all that. I actually even wanted to make it bigger than that. Like, this is kind of national cybersecurity from our standpoint, and that's big enough. How's it being kind of perceived and partnered from outside of the U.S.? Like, is there international consensus on some of this stuff? Is there any governing bodies? Like, how do we get the buy-in of our partners around the world on this? I mean, it's hard enough just in the boundary called the U.S. But any thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right. The U.S. has great partnerships with the Five Eyes nations, AUKUS. We're we're working more to expand partnerships and build relationships with the Caucasus, the Balkans, Central Asia. Of course, the big Western allies, Canada, Britain, New Zealand. So they're there. In terms of a standardized approach, the big flashpoint now is actually a UN cybercrime convention, a UN cybercrime treaty. The problem is that you have our foreign adversaries on that same world stage, Russia, China, Iran, etc. So the big flashpoint among officials right now is, does the US sign on to that? Because there are concerns that we may legitimize the behavior of these cyber adversaries. The U.S. spies. Of course, we spy on people. We hack our enemies. It's pretty obvious at this point. You've seen that through the dozens and dozens of reports and leaks that have come out. We all spy on each other, but the U.S. doesn't spy and go after people the same way an Iran would, the same way a Russia would. It's much more assertive out in those nations. The notion of Russia immediately cracking down on anti-war protesters. Immediately you stand in Moscow, you pull out an anti-war sign, and immediately police go after you. Mm-hmm. That behavior is not the same over here. Right. There are, of course, there's no such thing as a perfect country. There are ethics considerations here in the U.S., but that behavior is not the same. So the concern is that, do we enable the surveillance norms that our foreign adversaries peddle if we sign on to this treaty? So that's an ongoing debate right now. This UN cybercrime treaty, they're in the process, I believe, to get a vote out on that, I think before the end of the year. But will the US sign on to that? It's yet to be seen.
Interesting.
Yeah, because it is tricky. I mean, to your point, when there is a crime committed and they are from a certain country, those people aren't extradited. They're never really held accountable either, right? So there's the enforcement aspect of whatever gets stood up, right? I mean, does it have any teeth, or is it just in words only, right? If you can't have any kind of enforcement or accountability, right? That seems very tricky.
Yeah. The thing with this UN cybercrime treaty, as it's proposed right now, is that it would pass along a lot of the specific authorities back to the countries it covers. So it's very up to the interpretability of the nations that fall under it. Mm-hmm. It's not a green light to say, well, do whatever the heck you want, but it certainly gives countries a lot of leeway to do what they want. So again, it's that prevailing question: do we enable or allow or permit these behaviors of foreign adversaries by signing on to this treaty? Right.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
David. Rachel kind of touched on this before, maybe just kind of shifting gears. I can tell you, anytime I talk about kind of that secret world, I literally can feel my heart rate. It's go up. It's like exciting. So maybe we'll calm it down a little bit. Just kind of talk about, federal cybersecurity regulations and initiatives. And Rachael mentioned earlier in the podcast, that's ever evolving. As a reporter, any impactful initiatives that you've reported on in the near past, or maybe moving forward here in the near future?
Yeah, the thing I've been looking at our level is IoT security, which has been interesting because it's very much a federal agency theme, and we had reported earlier on this year that a lot of the federal government didn't have procedures in place to protect their own IoT assets. That's expanded quite a bit. I think in reporting that it's gotten some more attention, but there's also the concept of procuring IoT assets that we had to think about as well. So something I've been following is these House China hawks trying to crack down on the procurement of IoT and LiDAR that's light imaging, detection, ranging technologies, IoT and LiDAR procurement from foreign adversaries like China. China has dominated a lot of the LiDAR and IoT market, and there are concerns that if you tether this type of hardware, this equipment onto our critical infrastructure here in the U.S., that it may enable or open up certain systems to spying or intelligence gathering, terrain mapping. That's been, I guess, more of a national security focus. I'd say more broadly on the consumer-facing side, the government's been thinking long and hard about this concept of a cyber trust mark, which is it's very akin to what we would see with an Energy Star label. But then, in essence, you would slap a label on consumer products that you could grab off the shelf, you could shop for normally, that indicate this meets certain cybersecurity standards. Yeah. It's probably safer than alternatives. And so with an Energy Star rating, it's the same idea. It's more energy efficient. It's better for the environment. Getting that label out there, it's tricky. It's administered mainly by the Federal Communications Commission, but the cyber standards itself, those are developed by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and then it's also overseen broadly by the National Security Council. Of course, we have a new administration coming in, so the goal has been to get these labels onto shelves for consumers. I'd say at this point, early next year, there seems to have been a little bit of a push. Downstream pushback on the release date for this, which is understandable because it's very hard to develop these. Right now, specifically, I know the U.S. is shopping for an administrator or program administrators to get this thing going. So there will be a cyber trust label administrator for this as well. So there are more steps in play here. But look, the goal is IoT assets. They just make up so much of what we do every day. I mean, this computer that I'm recording this on, in a way, it's an IoT asset. I mean, I for people who choose to have a smart fridge or smart thermostat at home, it's the same concept. Or I don't know, a garage door opener. There are a lot of internet connect devices today. Right. It's been deemed a concern because, of course, that's why if it wasn't a concern, we wouldn't be doing this, right? Yep. But it's going to take some more work, but it seems to be chugging along, I think, at a good pace. And look, we'll see what happens. I haven't heard that much from the National Security Council at this point about progress, but look, we'll see what happens next.
Yeah. Rachel, I don't know if you track that at all. I've got a pretty deep networking background, David, and IoT is a big issue for me. Like I nerd out, and I can tell everything on my network. I have 111 devices on my network, and in our
a lot
house,
of devices.
We have 3 computers. So all the things you just talked about. I mean, I can run my dishwasher, my oven, my refrigerator, the cameras in my garages. I mean, you name it. But I watch that religiously just to make sure nobody's logging on, or I don't see kind of anomalous behavior from any of those devices, things like that. But that is a big concern as we move forward, and for all the reasons you talked about. So.
Yeah, it's funny. David, sometimes I advocate maybe we need to go back to, the Stone Age and just unplug everything. Maybe that's the answer for critical infrastructure security. Let's just take everything offline. Let's go back to the manual, lift and shift and see if that helps us get ahead of things. But nobody seems to want to jump on that wagon with me.
Spent a carrier pigeon here at work myself, so I'm with
you. But speaking of future proofing, I'd be really interested in what you're hearing here. In securing emerging technologies, quantum has been coming up a lot more recently, and it seems to kind of come in these waves. I think quantum's still 10 years away, Vince, is what I've been seeing. But are you seeing any kind of regulation initiatives or hearing any things being developed, as we look at, the impact of quantum when it finally comes online, hopefully in 10 years and not 30 years. I know everyone's worried about the encryption cracking capabilities and all these other use cases, but I'd love to know what you're hearing in the Beltway.
Yeah. The biggest development in recent months has been, finally, we got a release of post-quantum cryptography standards. And so you might ask, what the heck is that? In essence, It's when quantum computers come on the scene. The question is, will we have sufficient enough encryption standards in place so that the capabilities of a quantum machine would not be able to break through that encryption access? So it's a normal computer that we would have in this case, for day-to-day work, something that we're talking about right now. Can you protect your encrypted data on that computer from being breached by the capabilities of the quantum system? If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Those standards have been released. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has, I think, approved 14 of the standards now. The next question is, how do you bolt that on to systems? And how do you deploy quantum practically in environments, especially for federal uses?
Right.
That part's tricky. If you've ever seen a quantum computer, they are very large. You have to maintain quantum coherence, stability, by setting this equipment, this hardware up in very, very cool, like quite literally temperature cold environments, so that qubit states and other scientific it's a lot of scientific mishmash here, but you want to make sure that the quantum device is computationally accurate. And in order to do that, you need to set them up in very specified environments. I can't picture in the near term, installing a physical quantum device into a government agency or into an office. So a lot of the stuff, recently we had there was an NSA scientist who said, yeah, you're probably going to see this stuff maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, but it's not going to be on-prem. We always talk about on-prem and networking and in cloud and stuff like that. But quite literally, you're not going to have those on-prem quantum computers there just yet. A lot of it's going to be cloud deployed. That's what we're hearing. The other question too is, how do you actually install and mechanize encryption capabilities into a normal computer? That question is way beyond me. I'm not a quantum scientist, but there's going to be a lot more to explore here. I will say though, the private sector is definitely, they are chugging away at this. They're chugging away at this because it's important. The big concern that a lot of thought leaders have in the government are these they're called record now, decrypt later attacks. That's when an adversary comes into on your network. They nab data. It might be encrypted data, by the way, so it's useless to them because they can't access it. But then eventually, with the capability of a quantum device, they'll be able to use that to break through the encryption standards and access that data for exploitation, for fraud, etc. Can we shore up our systems in times that if that type of attack happens, we could prevent them from proceeding? That's the big question on people's minds.
Absolutely. Dave, maybe last question around regulations of that. You talked earlier about, agencies and entities, government entities. A lot of them are stovepipe, and maybe AI will help kind of expand the ability to communicate. But with your experience and the things you report on, are you seeing from different groups where regulations are overlapping and it makes you kind of scratch your head that one confuses, another?
Yeah.
All those kind of issues. Yeah.
So it's funny because in prepping for this, I took a lot of notes to discuss this part. The big flashpoint is it's a regulation called the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, CIRCIA. In essence, it's governed by CISA, that's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that's in the Department of Homeland Security, and mandates that critical infrastructure entities that are targeted by ransomware or other cyber attacks, they have to report them to CISA in a timely manner. So the proposed law says you have to report general incidents within 72 hours, which is not a lot of time.
Yeah.
Ransomware attacks need to be reported faster than that. And what's interesting is that as of when the law was first proposed in earlier rulemaking sometime, it was in April this year, CISA said that around 300,000 entities would be subjected to this. There's a lot of critical infrastructure entities out there. The challenge is that, you already have cyber incident reporting rules in place from other agencies like the Federal Communications Commission, like the Securities and Exchange Commission, which governs a lot of the financial sector. The SEC has its own rule that's gotten a lot of pushback in Congress. There have been lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that say, why do you have to force publicly traded entities to report a cyber incident in an 8K filing so everyone sees it? It's through the official SEC EDGAR systems. They have to report that quite fast. I think a similar time frame to that 72-hour window, although the exact time frame escapes me at the moment. It's tough. This is the big challenge of overlapping regulations that we've been following. Because in the case of, let's take the Securities and Exchange Commission, for instance, the financial sector is considered critical infrastructure under current U.S. guidelines, because God forbid, if there's a major cyber attack on a bank or financial system that governs a lot of how regular people like you and me transact, right. That would be disastrous. It'd be an economic crisis. But why would a company that is considered critical infrastructure under CERCIA as well have to report twice? You'd report under CERCIA, you'd report under the SEC regulations. I'm told that a lot of these companies have been spending more money hiring legal staff to help them comply with these rules than quite literally investing in cyber protections that could prevent these breaches in the first place. Wow. That's the big tension point that Congress is saying, things that I'm hearing when I talk to CISOs. That's the big picture dynamic. I'll mention too that there are efforts underway to implement regulatory harmonization. So the Office of the National Cyber Director is supporting this. They've said quite clearly that we're aware that there's a lot of overlap. They're working with Congress right now on it's a bill in process. I'm not sure if it'll run separate from the National Defense Authorization Act and the typical conferencing that goes on by the end of the year. The NDAA is a must-pass defense policy bill, of course, for listeners who don't realize that. So the question is, do we put cyber regulatory harmonization to NDAA? It's quite possible, but it might run separate from that. And in essence, the bill, which I believe originated from the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, it would bring interagency stakeholders together in a committee, I believe, under the Office of the National Cyber Director, and they would hash these out, because this overlap, it appears to be causing headaches. I'm not a CISO, I'm not an official, but from what we're being told, it's causing a lot of headaches. And the fact that the White House is acknowledging that too is a very big deal. Right. That I'd say is the biggest tension point under cyber regulations at this stage. And look, we'll see what happens next with this, with the new administration coming in. Yeah. I don't know how ONCD is going to be augmented or how it's going to behave if they're going to continue to pursue this stuff. But I'd imagine in an environment that's not as adamant on regulating, they're going to want to see a bit of harmonization at minimum, and possibly less. Mm-hmm. We'll find out.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's curious. So I'm going to get into my favorite topic where we talk about foreign adversaries. I love these things. And as a cyber journalist, David, you've got a front row seat to all the high profile incidents that are going on. Of the things that you've maybe seen in, the recent past in the last year yet, say, does anything scare you, or are we just kind of saying, oh, it's just another day, on the attack surface?
I don't have anything in particular that would frighten me per se, but it seems that this stuff is never ending, right? Yes. I'm personally not, I guess, afraid to get out of bed every day when we cover these things, but I would say it's quite pervasive. The big thing that we've been following lately are the Salt Typhoon intrusions into U.S. telecom companies, and also what it sounds like is the infrastructure that facilitates our court-authorized wiretap systems. I'm giving kudos to my competitors out in the field. The Wall Street Journal, CNN, Politico, they've been doing a great job kind of helping to advance the story here. This has appeared to be a very, very complicated, advanced espionage campaign into telcos. And we know at this stage that the target service, around 10 to 12 telecom companies, we know AT&T, Verizon, and Lumen are among them. We know that they've targeted officials on both sides of the political aisle, including people close to President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. Well, so it's quite pervasive, and we know that they've accessed audio communications as well, and I believe unencrypted text messages. So it's quite a bit of stuff that they've been able to grab. The Cyber Safety Review Board in DHS is going to be investigating this. They confirmed that to us recently. I actually have a small readout too from a staffer on the House side, and the House of Representatives told me that they, quote, received a classified briefing, this was yesterday, from CISA, ODNI, and the FBI regarding heightened concerns about the reports of Salt Typhoon, and that the committees are going to continue to examine this intrusion because there's serious national security implications involved. So the fact that select committees in Congress are getting briefed on this from what we're being told is a big deal. This is investigators seem to believe that this is one of the most pervasive espionage campaigns to date. And we didn't report this. I think the Wall Street Journal reported this first, but it's possible that they've been in these systems. They got in 8 months ago. That means I'd only been in this job for a few months when they got in. So the Salt Typhoon intruders, that's the biggest, latest foreign adversary campaign that we're following. Gotcha. I'd say another thing, which is dovetailing off of the presidential elections. We had a safe and secure election. CISA told us that. Mm-hmm. There haven't been any concessions, from the Democrats about being cheated or about any election fraud. But we've known for months, and it echoes 2016 and it echoes more recent years, that foreign adversaries have tried to influence the way the election is conducted. And I think what's very, frankly, what's very evil and scary is that on election day, on November 5th, we saw that what the FBI said were a lot of Russian affiliated email domains sending out hoax bomb threats to campaign sites. Yeah. Which it didn't stop the process of conducting the election. The election again was safe and secure from what officials tell us, but it certainly slowed things down. There were evacuations. I asked the FBI if it could give me an exact number. They declined to give me an exact number. But from what I've tracked, and from what other reporting I've read, that is not mine. I want to give credit where credit is due, but it looks like from other reports, it's been dozens of these hoax bomb threats, which is a lot, and also in swing states as well, where people are watching, and you have to be very careful and precise about how you count these votes, and so to create slowdowns like that, it's I know for certain officials are furious. It's a knock on our democracy, and it would shock me if the FBI wasn't looking into this further at this point.
David, I want to just get your perspective on, what's the motivation behind that? And what I mean by that is, earlier in the campaign, the right was leaked information from the left, and they came public and said, we won't use this. There's always kind of talks that certain nation states were trying to help, the right win. You talk about, just a myriad bomb threats in multiple states, which would impact potentially either side of the aisle having their voters come out and vote for them. So it doesn't necessarily come across as a nation state wanting to put a certain candidate or party in power. So the reasons behind it have to be bigger. Is it just an overall trust thing, or just, if you had to characterize what's the motivation behind all of this? Do you have an opinion on that?
I'll just clarify that, and this has come from intelligence assessments that reporters have been briefed on, that in essence, in the months leading up to our presidential election, Russia preferred former President Trump, who's now to be president again, but at the time they preferred former President Trump to win, and they were deploying influence and disinformation campaigns to sway votes in favor of him. And on the flip side, Iran favored Vice President Kamala Harris to win.
Interesting. Okay.
Because the perceptions that she was softer on policies related to what's going on in the Middle East. And we know historically Trump has not been kind to Iran and to foreign adversaries over there. So I'll just clarify that there were targeted attempts at the presidential level to get a certain candidate back into the Oval Office. So I'll clarify that. Broadly speaking, I think in 2024, it's a perfect storm of things. A record number of people around planet Earth voted in elections this year. AI at the consumer-facing level hit our computers, became available this year. It's a perfect storm of opportunity for adversaries. Yeah. A lot of these guys, it's just fun and games for them. I think we forget that. I think what's shrouded a lot in conversations in Washington and is that, the adversaries are trying to do this. They're attempting this. We assess this. They enjoy it. This is why they're called foreign adversaries. Unfortunately, we know that with elections, especially in the U.S. is a very, very powerful country that helps dictate the rest of the way the world works. A lot of people, as I've learned, in talking to friends and sources and just colleagues outside the U.S., a lot of people watch the United States presidential election because America is so influential on the rest of the world's global foreign policy. If there's a way to undermine democratic institutions that dictate how we elect officials here, then our adversaries will take advantage of that. AI utilization, just advancements in technology in general, I think it's contributed to that as well. It's the way things have stacked up this year. It's a perfect storm. I'd say that's the best way to put it. And this stuff isn't going away. AI isn't going away. We have to see how President-elect Trump dictates the way our government functions in the coming months. That's something we're going to be following very carefully, especially from a cyber regulation side. There's a lot more to explore.
Thank you. Appreciate that opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to be cognizant of time. So I'm going to wrap up here with a fun question, hopefully. Given all that you've seen kind of on the cybersecurity front and what you're hearing, from those in government or, kind of elsewhere, as we look at 2025, what are you concerned about? Anything in terms of developing cyber incidents, and or do you see anything kind of bubbling up as a trend? Everybody likes to know what's going to happen in the future. Can you look into your crystal ball and tell us, David?
And Rachael said concern. If there's anything you're excited about, that would be good.
That's true. Exactly. Yes. Doesn't have to be doom and gloom. Good clarification.
I'd say if I had a real crystal ball, my life would be a lot easier, but I'll try to extrapolate a bit. I think it's pretty clear at this point, and this is just from officials and executives I talk to. Going forward, the next geopolitical conflict will have a major cyber component embedded into it, a lot more than what we've seen between Israel and Hamas or Russia and Ukraine. It appears that the next war will have a major cyber component embedded into it. I'm not jockeying any nation in particular to start a war or to plant seeds to start a war. I think deep down nobody wants conflict, but it's there and it's happening, and it's this concept of great power competition. It's being dictated largely as we see, and we see it in our defense policy bills. We see it in military buildup around the world as well. Tech and cyber are certainly here to stay. I say more on the ground here in the federal space. We're going to be watching for how cyber regulations in the U.S. government are influenced by this under second Trump administration. One thing we had just reported is there's a broad desire to roll back a lot of agency funding and shed what they deem as government waste. There's this concept of a government efficiency commission going around that's aimed to be stood up under a second Trump administration. But the question is, how does that work in terms of funding cyber defenses within agencies? Right. Foreign adversaries love going after government agencies. We've seen it time and time again. It's been a mainstay motivation for regulations in the Biden era. SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline. Of course, there's a major incident last year that got the attention of the Cyber Safety Review Board. It's when a separate Chinese hacker group got into the email inboxes of major U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Gina Raimondo and I think Nick Burns, our ambassador to China. So being able to access that. We had another case earlier, I think in January, when Russian hackers accessed email communications between agencies as well. So the federal government enterprise is a prime target. If you reduce agency budgets, are you going to have enough money to go around to hire chief information officers for those agencies, chief information security officers? And then, of course, the recurring revenue that you pay for with contractors to keep antivirus software and on-prem solutions to stop phishing attacks or detect phishing. There are a lot of ways to get in. There are a lot of techniques that these guys use. Will there be enough money to go around? That's something we're going to find out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's because what do they like to say about cyber, right? The adversaries, they can try hundreds of thousands of times and think to AI it's all automated, and they just have to get in once, right? Of the whole attack surface, there's a lot of cracks, and that's going to be a big one to watch for sure. It's a really good point. Vince, did you have any parting thoughts?
No, that's
great,
David. Yeah, very interesting. I mean, it's like you said, whenever we're talking about foreign adversaries or whatever, I just feel my heart rate go up. It's like you said, it's like a Tom Clancy kind of novel thing for me. But and it's it's got its concern side, but also comes with a lot of optimism as well on certain things going on. But appreciate you and your time and coming on and talking to Rachael and I and our listeners. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yeah, it must be so cool to be in the Beltway, right? And, kind of a fly on the wall. And, depending on where you go in the conversations you can hear and the people that you get to talk to, I just, that is so cool. That is so cool.
Jay, I'm very lucky and it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And to all of our listeners, thank you again for joining us for yet another amazing podcast episode and guest. And as always, Vince, do I need the drum roll?
Please smash that like button. Tell us what we're doing right. Future topics for our podcast, and we just appreciate you all listening in.
Absolutely.
On a weekly basis.
Absolutely. Well, on behalf of Vince and I, everybody, until next time, stay safe. Thanks for joining us on the To The Point Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Forcepoint. For more information and show notes from today's episode, please visit www.forcepoint.com/podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts.